what is a dance convention and what are the pros and cons of attending those.
What do you think about studios doing in-studio conventions instead of dance competitions? Like, where's the confidence level? What is best for the child? And
Person in life, like you're always learning. There's always something to be gained. Welcome back to season 5 of Beyond the Steps, presented by Apollo Performance Wear and Turning Point Dance Creations. Today, we are talking with a very special guest who has been with us before about the pros and cons of why dance competitions aren't always good for studios. There's a lot of takes on this, so I'm really excited to dive in. We've got another very fantastic conversation. And Melissa, tell everybody who's joining us today.
we have Brandon Cornet, who received his BFA from Juilliard School, and after a multi-decade career in performance and commercial work and film and theater, he's now the executive director and producer of Dance Higginbotham and producer of Lower Manhattan Cultural Council's River to River Festival. Brandon is the founder and executive artistic director at Dance Device Lab, also known as DDL, which produces student-focused interactive educational events at dance studios and performing arts schools nationwide. He's a national reviewer for young arts and has been featured in multiple publications, including Dance Magazine. Welcome, Brandon.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. It's so great to be back with you all.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We want to jump right in. Let's talk about what's missing. What do you think is missing most in dance studios in their dance training program?
Yeah, I think class is missing. I'm going to sound like a total grandpa, but I'm finding that everyone these days wants to be a bit of like a microwave. Like their training wants to be microwaved. And, I'm a full believer that like you need to be in a slow cooker, right? It takes time to like marinate and change and develop those skills. And you know, I find going across the country that a lot of studios are like, oh yeah, my dancers take lyrical class. And then I later find out that that class is just choreography for competition. Like there's not the time, there's not the hour of like actually like going through a proper warm up and going across the floor and doing a combo. And I think those fundamentals, that shifts with TikTok and the sort of flashiness of the instant gratification of society right now. And I think we could go back a little bit more to those fundamentals. And, I teach it at conventions and, sometimes I'll see a dance that I judge on like a Friday night and I'm like in awe of these dancers. It's just like the most incredible things I've ever seen in the world. And then the next morning in class, they can't remember 3 or 4 8s in choreography. And I'm just like, okay, so I know you're not taking class regularly. So that's what I'm see is missing a lot.
I feel like oftentimes the class time is what gets sacrificed the closer you get to competition too. Like, and not every studio has dedicated rehearsal time versus class time, which I also think is really important. We were really fortunate when I was directing that we had 30-minute rehearsals for every piece, had its own 30-minute rehearsal, and then they had their core set of classes. But I was so amazed when I stepped out of the building to see what everybody else was doing, a lot of times is not the case, right? And so you have these kids that are the emphasis is competition, 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 and I think that's why the conversation we're having today is so important. So, pros and cons, why dance competitions aren't always good for studios. Let's dive in. What are the pros of a dance studio being competitive?
Totally. I grew up as a comp and convention kid, so it is really in my DNA. And I mean, the sort of like rush and the energy of it is like a major pro, right? That accountability really heightens your performance experience, and that is a form of training. Learning how to deal with your nerves and perform on stage and seeing other studios is so inspirational. That is like a huge pro. And there's like a lot of teamwork that goes into competition. There's so much camaraderie of, everyone waking up early and the energy behind it. It can really be solidifying for your studio and your team.
Yeah. I like on the business side too, because I mean, let's be real, these are businesses. They generate revenue. They have to generate revenue to keep the doors open and continue to provide dance education. But it's also a giant billboard for your studio. And so when you go there, how many people are in the audience from other studios, and some people that may be looking at making a switch or entering there, they have family members that come and watch, and they have people sitting in there that might be aware of your studio but not know the type of product you put out until they see you on stage. So it is super important too for the studio itself to have that. I always used to tell people competition, the competitive program is what gets people in the door, and then the rec program is what keeps them there, right? Like the rec classes and the way that you facilitate your rec classes, that's the moneymaker, right? So it's really important to look at it from that standpoint too. What are the cons in your mind?
There's some cons, yeah. I mean, they're expensive. They have gone some of them have just gone so beyond what I think, some families that I encounter across my family certainly couldn't afford growing up. And, and
Yeah,
that
with
is
mortgage payments. I mean, what families are paying for dance is, I mean, I have 2 kids, 8 and 11, and I mean, I was setting those prices for people, and I don't know how we would do it. I really.
and you factor in, the fees are one thing, then the travel is a whole other thing. And, they're expensive. I find sometimes there is a little too much focus on winning versus training, which goes to my earlier point. And, there as someone who used to judge a lot, it's a nearly impossible job. You are in a chair for 12 hours. Yeah, I mean, it's insane. So it's like, there is sometimes inconsistency or lack of feedback in a way that, and I'm not bashing any judges for it because I've been there and it is so, so hard. But I feel like sometimes people really go in to competitions wanting this like life-changing critique in like 3 minutes. And it's so difficult. So I think there are some cons with the way that the sort of structure that we've been living in hasn't been reinvented to sort of facilitate better communication of feedback.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a conversation because judging is a really hard job the way that it is set up right now. Um, but at the same time, people are paying their money. They come to do these things. I feel like we've got to do a better job at figuring out the whole judging thing because this is not a knock on the judges because they're doing what is asked of them. But I feel like there is a better system for it because there's nothing worse. Like you pick your competitions, you pay for them, sometimes 9, 10 months in advance, you have to book that, put the deposit down and all of those things. And you work all season and you get there and you hear singing along to the music or work or yes or like yeah, yay, like and you're just like, can I get something like that I can take back and workshop with? So I do think that there's something to be said for that. And I know there's a lot of nuances, like you don't want to change judges in the middle of a section or an age group because you want everything to be consistent. Like I get all that, but the bottom line is like you have all these people paying this money to come and get the feedback. So give it to them.
I'm in favor of an airplane pilot model. It's like, they can't, they have like two sets of airplanes when you're flying from Dallas to Sydney, like every 8 hours, you just got to switch out. You need some freshness in there. It'll benefit everybody.
I feel like a lot of, no matter how much we say we're trying to regulate this and we emphasize, training, at the end of the day, you've got kids that are up there doing, 3, 4, 5 solos that all look the same, that all, and it's like this line that I feel like we have to draw in the sand here of like, like you said, is training more important or is it the competitive environment? Is it winning at all costs? Is it, how many times are we going to put the same kid up there in a different costume doing the same movement? And then we're showing up on Wednesday and Thursday. Like it's like a whole nother conversation to have that talk. But yeah, I definitely I think there's good and bad. I think it has to be regulated from the people that are organizing the events. And I think that's where we're slightly off still a little bit. What about dance conventions? So for those that are out there that are, wondering what the heck that means, kind of give us a debrief on what is a dance convention and what are the pros and cons of attending those.
Yeah, a dance convention is essentially a sort of amalgam of all the studios in your area. So you'd go to a central hub and take class from guest master teachers from across the country. So maybe 5 or 6 faculty members that are really, really high level teachers and choreographers. And then all the studios in the area will come together in one room and take class with hundreds of dancers learning from one teacher. And it's so fun. I was more of a convention kid growing up than a comp kid, and it was just like the best just to dance with people from other studios. I still have friends like in the city, and I live in New York, and I'm like friends with people that I grew up doing dance conventions with that weren't at my studio, that we all grew up in Michigan together. And the camaraderie there is so it's different than going to a comp, right? You're not necessarily there are competitions attached sometimes, but it's like the emphasis is class. So you're with your local dance community, and it's really fun to learn new styles. I know like some conventions are teaching ballroom now, and it's like, it's a way to sort of introduce things to your dancers that you may not have in your local community. And I think they're really fantastic.
There's just also nothing better than being when you're the top person at your studio. Like I always say, if you're at the top of your game, you're not in the right place. Like you need to be up against people who are better than you, that challenge you to be better, that give you that next level motivation. And when you're top at your studio and you get outside those walls and see the top at all the studios and see what else is out there, it really puts things in perspective, not only for the dancer or athlete, but for the parents, and the educators as well. And so I think that's really important. And then also a lot of knowing that these conventions go to so many different cities. I mean, you guys tour all over the place. And many times they're going to middle America. They don't have access to New York choreographers or LA choreographers. So like you said, it's getting those different styles, but it's also from people that are actually working in the industry that have a perspective that you may not be receiving at your studio, right? So the cons of conventions, what do you think that is?
Yeah, I think the cons of conventions are it can feel a little bit that you're like one in a million. And there is a sort of lack of individualized attention or feedback for dancers, and I think conventions are at an elevated level. And maybe your studio isn't as advanced or as ready, or maybe you're not like full in the sort of competition convention world. And I feel like sometimes they can be a little skewed to an advanced level. And I find that sometimes, like, some kids are just can't pick it up and have never been exposed to learning something this fast. And that it goes to that flashy element of like, we're doing it and we're doing it now. Like, there's a lack of training and teaching that goes into it. So, I feel like some people can get a little lost in the sauce.
And it can be intimidating for them. I mean, I've noticed that when I've taught conventions before, and I am a judge, I'm a teacher in studio currently, and I take my students to conventions regularly, and I do have a wide range of student ability levels, and I'm like, okay, such and such is 13, but should she be in the teen room? Because, I don't want that student to be intimidated by the teen room, but I also don't want them to feel deflated because they're in the junior room.
Well, we never want to set our students up for failure. And I think that I think that's maybe a question we need to ask ourselves when we're going is like, are they at the point where they're ready for this environment, but it's going to push them to the next level? Or are they going to drown in this environment? Because if they're going to drown in that environment, there's probably certain ones that are better suited for them, or maybe wait on taking them until, because you don't want to destroy a kid's confidence by going somewhere like that either.
Right, exactly. And that's very hard to explain to a parent though. I mean, I remember those days when you check in at the convention and you got your armbands, and the teen room is the silver armband and the junior room is the red armband, and you hand them out and the parents like, "Why are you giving her a red armband?" Well, but because she drowned in that other room. But she's 13 and I mean, you get just the big. And then the kids are also looking like, why does she have a silver armband versus this? And then some conventions will put different teachers in the teen room, and they really wanted to be on this in this room with this teacher because they were on So You Think You Can Dance, or they were on it. Just it becomes a thing, and there's so much more that you have to think about. To Bree's point, like, is that child going to drown in that room? Where's the confidence level? What is best for the child? And we have to start making decisions about what is best for the student, not what is best for the ego of the parent, or even the child's ego. What's best for the development of the child needs to be at the forefront of the decisions that we're making. I want to jump into this because I get this all the time. I've gotten this very recently in the studio, students that you've been teaching for years and years and years that have been competing, they come to class weekly, and it becomes this, I want to go to a convention only studio. I don't know if they have those in New York or over in Idaho where you are, but now there's these studios here popping up in North Carolina that are convention only.
Yeah, Brandon, how do you deal with, because you are that. You are a convention, you cater to studios, you come to them, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. What is your thought on that? Because that is, the premise of the convention business, but they can't be the only thing, right? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it goes back to like the training aspect of it. Like I actually see this more in like the dance team world of like, oh, this like core studio trains and makes these dancers really, really, really good. And then they go off and take those merits and like elevate another program where they're not necessarily trained in. And that for me, that's the disconnect of like, oh, well, we have to give some credit where credit is due in that foundational time. But it is interesting. I am in favor of cross pollination of artists and training because I do think these programs enhance the broader community. Studios can feel super siloed, and you're just with you know 20 to 50 dancers that you're with all the time. So I am in favor of broadening that, but I do think we do have to give credit where credit is due and just making sure it's not a competitive thing, and that it is like community enhancing.
Do you think that there's a certain level where convention classes can take the place of weekly technique? Or is that always a no matter what, you should go to your technique, your base, your foundational classes, even if you have elevated to the point where you're assisting people at conventions?
Oh yeah, yeah. Stay in class weekly. Stay in class weekly. Yeah, it is imperative. I guess I'll describe it as like adding more spices to your like grilled chicken, right? It's like like you have your grilled chicken, you make it, and to make it really delicious, you have to add all the training that you get, and you see that's your sage, that's your rosemary, that's your salt and pepper, and then you go to the conventions, and that's like your hot sauce, right? That's not the stuff that you oh my gosh, I'm sorry. But yeah, I don't think a convention will never replace your weekly training at your dance studio. It is the most vital of
Well, and
all of
they're
it.
very different. They're very different environments. So what you're going to get from a convention in the general sense of the word is a lot of kids. The goal isn't you're learning the perspective, you're learning different styles and choreography, but you're doing it in a sea of people, right? Where you're not always going to be seen, you're not going to be given individual correction or feedback on what you're doing wrong. It's more mastering a style where I think the hybrid model of what you're doing, and again, we will talk about this, but where you're bringing the convention environment to the studios kind of gives you the best of both worlds. But I don't know that that's if doing that week in, week out. We had a lot of parents when I was still in the director's seat started as they got older, especially into high school, those late middle school, high school years, as their child was getting more accolades, they were really considering, well, we're going to just quit the studio and go to conventions on our own. Like, and that really sent a clear message to me. Wow, you really think you've learned all there is to learn? Like, you're done. And that's a no-go zone for me. Like, you're never done learning as a student, as a dancer, as a person in life. Like, you're always learning. There's always something to be gained from taking class. And so the minute you're backing your kid up in that thought process, you're doing them a huge disservice.
Yeah. And I do think there's this new thing that's happening of this assistant program, which I'm for. I did it. I was an assistant when I was in high school. I I think it's great in terms of like learning professionalism and what it's like to show up to a dance job really, really young. But people ask me about it all the time, and I just say like, well, when do they rest? Like if you're on a plane on Friday and Sunday and then you're going back to school and then you're doing your training during the week, like, I just advise people to like less is more in that capacity. You can get what you need to gain from that experience by not going out for like 20 weekends as a 16-year-old. It's like you have to find that balance of that training at home and this opportunity you've been given and find times to rest and recover because that is hard when you're on that schedule.
Mhm. Yeah, it totally is, and we have to prioritize rest, everyone. Rest and recovery is very, very important. We touched on this a little bit, and I wanna go into it, kind of the hybrid model that your company does, in-studio dance conventions, where I think you get more of the in personal critique, more of the personal attention, but it's still the convention setting. What do you think about studios doing in studio conventions instead of dance competitions? Like, do you think that that's a good trade out? Could it be the best of both worlds?
Yeah, obviously I'm for an in-studio dance convention with the work we do with Dance Device Lab. I think doing both is great. I think having that healthy balance is really, really wonderful. The things you'll get from an in-studio event with Dance Device Lab is we love coming into your studio and customizing this program for you. It's like, I have many conversations with studio owners about what are your goals? What are the trends you're seeing with your dancers this year? Do you want to enhance what you're working on, or do you want us to come in and do like a 180 and give them something different? And the individualized feedback and we talked on it earlier, but the community enhancement and community building that happens is really, really fantastic. We come in, we know I have like deep respect and like very humbled that I know I'm coming into your small business, right? And you're trusting us to bring people that you don't know into your business, into your community, and that is what you can't get from going to a big convention. Yeah, like planting the seed and building that energy in something that already exists and enhancing that. And I think a balance of both worlds is really a good way to go. It's like you can still get the guest teachers, but your dancers are getting a little bit more out of it. And then at the big conventions, it's the same thing, but everything we talked about it being a little bit heightened and with a bigger, broader community.
Yeah, so what you're saying, when we're talking about the pros and cons of dance competitions, you're really saying yes to all of it in moderation, right? Like you balance it out and have a little bit of each. Put a little bit of everything on the plate for a well-balanced meal.
We love a variety pack. Yeah, it's like an Applebee's sampler platter. Just do it all. Just do a little bit of it all.
And that's gonna be yeah, that's gonna be really tricky for some people because there's also that strategy, which I guess this is probably a whole nother conversation of like, I'm gonna go to the same competition all over the place to try to get qualified for nationals and like it becomes this whole other thing where you really have to look at the model and what is best for the studio may not always be best for the students and vice versa, and so it's that's a fine dance, I think, too. So what are the drawbacks of the mass appeal of celebrity guest teachers? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, I would sort of describe it as master educators versus master choreographers. This idea of like a master teacher is like this hybrid thing that actually is really hard to describe for all the reasons that we're talking about. And, there's a time and place for both. I think having like a hot shot master choreographer come in and run a room in the way that is like an audition or we're doing something for Madonna, and like sort of simulating that fast paced kind of like video film environment. Sure, there is a training aspect to that. But, fundamentally, I believe that these events, especially for dancers at all young ages, should be student focused and should be engaging. And I think that is a distinction between someone who's never really run a room for 6-year-olds and trying to, and it's all sort of about filming the best dancer. And it simulates a real world situation that I don't think should exist so much in the dance education space. And, everyone on my staff at Dance Device Lab we really are educators and teachers and have taught all levels and like teaching all levels. And it's something that we take a lot of pride in that is a shift in the industry.
It's getting back to that education instead of the flash and the grassroots. And two, I think a lot of those teachers are not always, they don't necessarily want to be in a room with 7 and 8 year olds, right? And they, nor are they equipped to teach that age. Like some of those master choreographers, whatever we're calling them, like the best place for them is for with those advanced dancers. And generally if you fly somebody like that into your studio, you have to make it worth it. So then they have them teaching kids that they're really not equipped to teach, or they're not really passionate about, and so that becomes evident, and then like really what are you paying for, right? So I think we have to put that in perspective as, teachers, adults in general, parents, and we get blinded by, I've seen parents just completely lose their crap over, somebody that comes in, their kid doesn't necessarily care, but the parents are just losing it. And you're just like, okay, let's get a grip.
I also think, like, most importantly, at the end of the day, you have a responsibility to be a good role model. Behavior is learned, and maybe you don't want to be in the room with the 7 to 8 year olds, but all I ask is that you better be a great representation of dance for these young people. You may not know how to lead the room, but if you're going to do it, you have a responsibility to show up and be really responsible and be an adult. Behavior is learned. And the changes that I think all of us on this call and people listening want to make in this industry start with the 7 year olds. Like it's all those seeds are planted. Yeah. So we have a responsibility for that I think is really an important part of this conversation.
Yeah, that's when they're sponges. Like that's when they grow the most, is that age. When they're teenagers, I hate to say it, but that foundation is laid already and you're not really going to go back and change that. They will grow and develop on top of that foundation, but that foundation is laid at that point. And so objective for change really comes in with those younger kids, and doing it differently and changing the way that we approach it. So I love that you just said that. For those just joining, this is Beyond the Steps Season 5. We are chatting with Brandon Cornet, the founder of Dance Device Lab, which is an in studio convention. Brandon's going to talk about how you can find out about where they're going to be and how to book them in just a minute. But before we do that, Brandon, we have homework. We give homework on the show every single week, and it is one thing you want to assign to our listeners to have them maybe think differently about this topic. We're talking about pros and cons of dance competitions for studios. What is one thing you want to challenge people to do or think about as kind of finish up this conversation?
I think the one thing I really want to challenge people to do is take a holistic view of your training program. So, from the small scale of, okay, my dancers take one ballet class a week, 7 ballet classes a week, or whatever, to I do 17 competition and conventions over in the new year or whatever, and just put your calendar out in the world and see where the imbalances are. If you see that you're spending a lot of time in a certain world, maybe it is too much time in the studio. Maybe we are encouraging you to get out there a little bit more and shake things up and bring in studio events, go to the competition. Or if you're a studio that's doing all of the outside events and not focusing so much in the studio work, how can we sort of balance those scales a little bit? And I think that's a great way to go into the new year. Your year is probably set, but you're in it, and take a temperature of how you're feeling and how your dancers are feeling. And then it's sort of a long-term game as you head into planning your next season. And trying to get a little bit more like holistic training with all of these things that we have available, which is incredible. But how can we balance it out?
I love that. And our homework is the same every single week. In the meantime, Brandon, tell everybody what's going on with Dance Device Lab this season. What can they expect? How can they book an event? Talk a little bit about that and tell everybody how to get a hold of you.
Absolutely. So Dance Device Lab we bring guest teachers and in-studio convention events to studios nationwide. So if you want to bring the dance convention experience to your studio, we are the company for you. We also have our adjudication showcase, which is bringing the competition experience into your studio. So that's where we're going to dive in. Each dance gets a 15 to 20 minute slot, and we provide interactive feedback. So what you would get at a competition, but we are up on our feet rehearsing with your dancers, really getting tangible change out of them. So we have a sort of in-studio convention and an in-studio competition program. You can find us at dancedevicelab.com or on Instagram at dancedevicelab, and we are all over the country currently and next year, and we're excited to continue touching base with all you studios.
Now, can people call to book you at their studio, or do you have set dates and time? People are welcome to join at your events. How does that work?
If you would like to book your event at your studio, you can go to our website, and my email is there, and you can contact me. We don't necessarily do open events across the country. That's sort of up to our studios that we work with. Some studios do open it up to the community, so we post about that on our Instagram if there's open registration.
Perfect. So don't miss out. Get your studio to call Brandon and bring them in because they are absolutely amazing. You guys won't regret it. They are a top tier organization, and the events that they put on are just completely amazing and mind blowing, and you will walk away changed. So I encourage you to check them out. DanceDeviceLab.com. Brandon, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's such a lovely conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that in studio competition, adjudicate. I love that. Take it. You might be seeing me soon, Brandon. Trust me. Um, in person. Thanks to Brandon for being here with us. Thank you so much to everyone who's viewing. Thank you to my amazing co-host, Bree Zabrowski. We love doing this together. Apollo and TPDC. Been doing it for 5 years, and we're happy that we have the guests and the viewers to keep doing it from here on out forevermore, hopefully. Our next show, we're going to have Kelsey Nelson on, who's been on a couple of times with us, and we are going to answer your most burning questions about dancer life. We're going to have a little chit chat, a little kiki around what we're doing here as dancers. So join us right back here next week on YouTube at Apollo Performance or at TP Dance Creations. If you have a topic or an idea that you would like to share with us or like to hear about, or you would like to be a guest, DM either one of us on our social media and we will get right back to you. Brandon has given you your homework. We have given you your homework.